would be a good movie if it really happened.
Welcome to MovieVS. I'm Emily.
And I'm Dakota.
Today we will be reviewing First Man and comparing it to the 1995 film Apollo 13.
The plot of First Man is unfortunately not an alternate history story about Bill Clinton. Instead, it focuses on Neil Armstrong from 1961 to 1969 and the journey that led him to become the first man on the moon.
Apollo 13 is about the third lunar mission, which takes place a year after the events of First Man in 1970. In the film, NASA must devise a way to get 3 astronauts home after an explosion on board leaves their spacecraft practically unusable.
So just off the bat, first impressions of First Man.
First man, first thoughts.
Yeah, sure.
I felt absolutely nothing.
I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly.
It's all about making the audience feel something.
Especially as someone who cares so much about space travel and the moon landing, I went into that movie hoping to feel something. I think one of the main reasons why there was a lack of emotion in the movie was the way that the direction and the acting chose to portray Neil Armstrong and the people that surrounded him.
One of the first things that happens in the film is Neil's daughter, Karen, passes away, and Ryan's subsequent portrayal of Neil throughout the movie is very emotionally devoid. And one could say it's because of that grief he feels. But in order for a movie to engage its audience, we need to be able to feel for the protagonist, or let alone any character really. And since First Man doesn't do any of that, it fails to be a compelling story.
Yeah, especially because in real life people talk about Neil Armstrong and they say he was quiet and stoic, but he had a sense of humor and he cared a lot about what he was doing and about the moon mission.
His dad was really a pretty funny guy. He had kind of dry wit.
We saw none of that from Ryan Gosling.
Compare that to Apollo 13, Tom Hanks, the protagonist. I mean, Tom Hanks as a person is just super charismatic. But him and his crew are fully invested in their mission, and they're so excited to share their experience with the world, even though no one really cares.
All the networks dumped us. One of them said we made going to the moon about as exciting as taking a trip to Pittsburgh.
It seems like Damien Chazelle wanted to make a movie about the man rather than the moon, but in portraying Neil Armstrong, who was by all accounts a fascinating individual as this lifeless, emotionless robot, he failed to make even that movie.
And the other characters in the film don't really provide much relief from that either. The only person who we really feel for is Claire Foy, but even her emotional moments feel unearned.
The first time you see any emotion from her is when she confronts NASA about them turning off her radio.
You have to trust us. We've got this under control.
No, you don't. You're a bunch of boys making models out of balsa wood. You don't have anything under control.
Balsa wood. It's not real wood.
And that would have been a really great moment if we had built up to that. But the problem is we never saw Claire Foy being frustrated with NASA being out of control or her not knowing what was going on. All we had for context was that scene.
And then her second emotional scene is when she finally tells off Neil for being a robot.
What are the chances you're not coming back? You're gonna sit the boys down and you're gonna prepare them for the fact you might not ever come home.
It's like a good moment too. Their family at the dinner table, they're finally having this discussion that they really need. Even that moment is ruined and Claire just cuts it off. She's just like, all right, we're good.
All right, we're done with this video. Bye. And even in her few moments of emotion, they're kind of ruined by her accent. She'll be like, I'm gonna drive the car. Do you think that's what she thinks we sound like?
Maybe. In Apollo 13, you actually get an idea of how Jim Lovell and his wife, their relationship, how it functions. The first time we really see the two as a couple, they're in the car, and the wife expresses that she doesn't really want to go to another shuttle launch.
Honey, it's not like I've never been to a launch before. The other wives have not done 3.
But then later in the film, when the launch actually happens, the wife does show up, and it's actually a really sweet moment.
Yeah, and there's, payoff to the build-up.
Yeah, their relationship has an arc.
Well, hey, that looks like Marilyn Lovell. But it can't be. She's not coming to the launch.
I heard it was going to be a hell of a show.
So who told you that?
Some guy I know.
Every character, even the small ones in Apollo 13, they feel full and alive. And all of the characters in First Man just feel like tools to serve Neil Armstrong. They even made Buzz Aldrin, the other person going on the moon, an asshole.
Damien Chazelle, it seems like, has this bad habit of writing about super successful and smart men who won't let anything stand in their way.
I want Spider-Man!
First Man, unfortunately, kind of portrays Neil as the one and only. It seems like he did the mission all by himself, when in real life, Neil says it was a group effort.
Bob, that trip was a perfect example of teamwork.
Apollo 13 is an ensemble cast. Mission Control has a personality in of itself, and we care about the individuals within the Mission Control.
Yeah, and each of them sort of has their own little goals.
We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this.
Can anyone tell me what's happening to my body?
Both of these movies have identical runtimes. They are both 2 hours and 20 minutes exactly, and somehow Apollo 13 just feels so much more full.
Yeah.
Of emotional moments that pay off. First Man has a few good, tense, stressful moments. But they're few and far between.
Not only did we barely get to know Neil Armstrong, but we barely got to know Mission Control. We didn't understand his relationship with his wife, and everyone else was just kind of diminished.
Let's get into some technical aspects of both of these movies, because there were some interesting technical things to First Man. Interesting.
Claustrophobia seems to be a big theme in First Man. The claustrophobia is very visually successful in the scenes where Neil Armstrong is in the spacecraft. All the shaking, all the tightness, it provided a really interesting sense of realism. This is really how we send people up in these things. This is how it feels. It felt like you were really there.
But then they used the same sense of claustrophobia in every single scene.
Claire Foy, you're beautiful, but I don't need to be able to count every single cute freckle on your face.
I understand having claustrophobia as a theme even outside of it if he feels claustrophobic in his life, but in order to actually experience claustrophobia, you have to know what the opposite is. And if you don't give an audience the chance to experience the release from claustrophobia, they're never going to appreciate that theme.
At the end, when he finally lands on the moon,
if you saw it in IMAX.
There's a release there, but it kind of comes too late.
One other technical aspect that's very prominent in First Man that I think brings it down drastically is the score.
Oh my god, the score is horrible. The score was unmemorable yet distracting at the same time, and the music didn't build at all. Like, there were themes, but they just kept on repeating. Justin Horwitz didn't take it to the next level, which is really disappointing because we know he's a talented guy. Whiplash, amazing score. La La Land, really catchy songs. A good score can make a boring film better, but a bad score in a bad film, nothing.
And I think that's something actually that Apollo 13 gets right. The score isn't that exciting, it's not great, but it does a good job of establishing the tone of the movie and the time period. Throughout the movie, there's just patriotic horns and drums, and then there's the soundtrack elements where they're playing Jimi Hendrix and they're playing Jefferson Airplane and they're playing Norman Greenbaum, and it just really gives you a sense that, okay, they're in the 70s. Let's talk set design, because I think in both movies it was great. Everything looked very authentic, except in First Man, the bathroom in the training facility where they were spinning around, it looked like it had been shit on by a homeless person for the last 50 years. And I looked this up, and that facility had been opened that year. That year!
I just want to give a special nod to Apollo 13 because that movie is littered with zero gravity scenes, and all of those scenes are shot practically.
And they weren't like economical with that either. They did it in all the time.
And Ron Howard's just overall attention to detail in the film, you can really see Ron's hand in the film. Like, he really wanted to make sure that Mission Control actually took lessons in how to control, like, together. Hats off to you, Ron Howard. We appreciate you.
It's Ron Howard Appreciation Day. When we see those elements in First Man of Mission Control, they look great, but the problem with it is that movie focuses so much on Neil Armstrong and is all in close-ups that we don't get a chance to appreciate that good production design and that really good representation of Mission Control. And I think that's a good metaphor for the movie, is it doesn't ever give you a chance to appreciate what you're watching. It's just devoid of all emotion and focuses way too much on one thing.
Overall, just pretty disappointing.
Yeah. How many moon emojis would you give it?
2 moons out of 5.
Can I give it a waning crescent?
Yeah. But then I want to give it a new moon because that's literally no moon.
I'm actually gonna give it like a 2. I think my biggest problem with First Man isn't the lack of emotion. It isn't the score. It isn't anything technical. I care a lot about the moon landing. And I think that the American public and the world cares a lot about that event. Because even though people opposed it happening, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, that felt like a human achievement. It felt like humanity had progressed. And to put that event in such a negative light just is unproductive. There is such an opposition to science and scientific progress in a lot of politics and a lot of the world right now. And I think to have a movie promoting those ideologies is dangerous and really just unhelpful. And I think there is a place for a movie that could paint this in a negative light. But this movie didn't even bother to make a statement about that. It was just a bad movie about that event.
I wanted to learn something about this event and see it in a new light, and it just fell really flat for me.
Yep.
Like the Earth.
Oh my God, or the moon. I'm a flat mooner. Anyway, on that depressing note, it is time to end. Thank you for watching this second episode of MovieVS. Next week, we will be back discussing Halloween versus Halloween, because it's Halloween.